Welcome to the Family, Health, and Hustle podcast, where sharing our stories, common experiences, and best practices about balancing family, practicing good health, and reaching your goals can help you feel supported, bring clarity, and guide you to the life you want. So if you're ready to challenge yourself, your health, and the hustle around you, then consider this your community. Now, let's welcome your host, Anthony Hernandez.
Hey, welcome back to the show. Appreciate you being here today. Today, I wanted to talk about something since the year is kind of winding down and it's time to start reevaluating our goals. How did we do this year? Did we accomplish some of them? Did we progress on some of them? For me, there's a handful of goals that I had written down that I did okay. I did accomplish them. I made some headway. There's a couple that I did accomplish. There's a couple that I'm nowhere near accomplishing. But that's okay, because what's that phrase? If you shoot for the moon and you fall short, you're still amongst the stars, right? Something like that. Anyway, so in that spirit of talking about goals and managing goals, right? It's one thing to write down something, which if you have, that's great. Most people don't even get that far. So if you've written down the things that you're trying to do this year or longer, you're already a step ahead. So great job. If you're reviewing those often, then you're even a further step ahead. So again, kudos to you. You're killing it. It's just a matter of time, if you're constantly looking over them and reviewing them, for you to find those opportunities that correlate with those goals, helping you accomplish those goals. But that brings up a very interesting conversation of how do you, when you set a goal, how do you kind of milestone it, lay it out, work on it, manage it, follow up with it? How do you do those things? And today's guest is an expert at goal setting, creating milestones, and just working down a path to accomplish those things. Today, we're going to be speaking with Tony Hernandez. Now, you might be asking yourself, wait a second, Anthony Hernandez, Tony Hernandez, what are the odds? Well, that's because Tony is my father. So I'm excited to have him on the show today. And like I said, he's someone that throughout my whole life I've always looked at and just kind of quietly admired. I don't know if I've even talked to him much about it, but seen the way he sets goals very specifically and follows through with them, whether they're little ones or big ones. And he's been doing that my whole life, to the point where now even his profession is managing goals and tasks, right? So he did a number of things throughout his life, and now he's a project manager professionally for a large company and helps manage many things at once. And so I thought, who better to bring on the show and talk to about some of this stuff, because I am trying to be organized. It's difficult. It's like against my nature. There's certain things I'm very organized and specific about, and then there's other things that I know need to get done, but it's like I got to force myself to manage it. Or for many years, I didn't even know how to manage it. I just kind of went with the flow, and then when I wasn't accomplishing the things I wanted to, or accomplishing certain goals I wanted to, I was like, what's going on, man? Why can't I do this? Well, it's because I didn't put a plan in place. And so he's the master planner. So I'm excited to have Tony on the show today. Along with doing project management right now, he's actually started his own podcast. He's the host of a show. I'll let him kind of explain some of that during the show as well as we jump in there. Anyway, so without further ado, Tony Hernandez. Welcome to the show, Pops.
What's going on?
Not
How's
much.
life?
Yeah, just living life. Just same old hustling. What about you?
Pretty good. Just keeping busy as we're getting into the holidays here. Just trying to get stuff done, both at work, at home, in life. You know how it is. Trying to stay busy, trying to get stuff done. Yep.
Yeah, we had the conversation a little while ago. I was saying how sometimes there's certain things at work that's like, I just want them to be over, but they correlate with like a holiday. And so I'm like just wanting it to be over. And then the holiday ends or the month ends, and afterwards I'm like, oh man, it went so fast. But it's because there was
Mhm.
something else that was going along during the month that I wanted that to be over, right?
Yeah.
So I don't want the holiday to end,
Yeah.
but some of the busyness I want to be done.
That's the crazy thing. You combine the two, and then the whole month just flies by. So I'm
Yeah,
trying to figure that out too as well, because I feel like when I do too much in a holiday, or should I say in a month, that month with the holiday just flies by, and I don't like it.
I
So,
agree.
yep.
Well, everyone at home, the reason I have my dad on the show today is, I often look at um, people like Elon Musk, who is managing several companies and many projects. Like, I mean, I think everyone can look at his workload and be like, man, he has to be pretty productive. That part is so foreign to me because I'm a very unorganized person. Naturally. Like I keep notes and stuff but like I've never throughout my whole life I haven't found the flow where it was like I'm going to do this, and part of that's daily disciplines, right? Is I'm sure you could say Monday I'm going to work on this, Tuesday I'm going to work on this, Wednesday I'm going to work on this. But for me, I'll be like, Monday I'm going to work on this, and then that time will come on Monday and I'm like, actually I want to do this instead. And I get distracted very easily. So it's a work in progress for me. But anyway, the reason I say that is um, my dad, Tony here, he's someone that I've always seen throughout life has very organized and very disciplined with everything he does, whether it's from finances to personal goals to vacations, whatever it is he's extremely disciplined and organized to the point where, I look at like an Elon Musk and stuff, and you know, not to burst your bubble, you're not an Elon Musk. I know you know that, but I think you have that type of organizational skill set, that ability where it's like, yeah, you actually could. Like if you were in that position, you could manage many, many, many projects, very high level, very intense projects at a time. And that's just something that I think is a talent of yours. Maybe it's a God
Thank you.
given talent. Maybe it's just something you've developed over time. And that's part of what I want that conversation or to hear today. Um, and I think it's extremely helpful to people in the audience who have goals and things they want to set, but again, have to balance life, or they have several things they're trying to do and they're trying to juggle it and say, man, how do I make time? Because we all have the same amount of time. There's really no excuse if we don't have time, right?
Right.
So that being said, I mean, let's jump in. Tell the audience a little bit about how your goals have evolved over your lifetime. Were you always good at organizing this type of stuff when you were younger? Did you recognize that ability? And did you proactively apply it to things that you were going after, or tell us a little bit about that and how you kind of grew up.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I wouldn't say that I always knew that I could do this well, but I was a hard worker in this sense. I always felt like when you wanted to get something done, you could be the engine to get it done. And so even as a young person, I remember being a kid, and I grew up in a home where my mother was very loving and stuff, but she was a little bit of a coddler. She would sit there and say, "You're so great. You've done so well." And I would always go, "I don't think so." And I was into sports a lot. And I remember having a bad performance and she was trying to tell me how great it was, and I would say, "No, that's not how I see it." And so I've always looked at the things I did and the things I wanted to be good at and measured them. And then I've created a plan to be better, and then I've created milestones. And that's how I would measure things. It didn't matter if it was sports or lifting or something else. I would say, that's the goal down there, and what are the steps in between that I can measure and really adjust and do that. And so I started learning that pretty young. I mean, I would say this even as a young person in sports. I performed pretty high, and I'm a pretty average guy. Like I'm pretty just an average sized guy, not super athletic beyond a normal person, but always have had opportunities to perform at a high level because of just working really hard, putting myself in a position to be ready to react after preparing hard to have the tools in the toolbox. And so those are some of the things I did early, but as I started going through life, I realized that there were different things that I found myself kind of just wanting to do, enjoying to do, and I had a system for how I did all those things. So I'll give you an example. When I was in my late teens, I was actually heavy into lifting and bodybuilding. And then I became a trainer for a little while, a fitness trainer. And one of the most exciting things for me was to take a person who did not believe they could get to a certain level and to help them see it and to help them pace it and prepare it and then walk with them through that process till they got to where they needed to. And so one of the first times I thought to myself, hey, I'm not too bad at this, is I kept having individuals that I would work with who really met their goals every time. And they were really good goals that were outpacing people that were being trained by other people, or even in some cases using steroids and stuff like that. I just was very disciplined about that and worked with them in that way. And so, even as a young person, I'm talking, 19 and under and 20, these are the things that I saw myself not only be good at, but really enjoyed. I just like to think it through and to measure it and to really just make adjustments as need be. So that's an example of when I was younger. But, all through my life, Anthony, what have I done for the family? I've been the vacation planner. I've done things like coach sports with some success. I've had 3 businesses, one of them being a restaurant. These are all areas I have no experience in prior to doing them. But the work, the research, and the planning to get those things to the point where they actually launched and happened took a bunch of work. But systematically, I was able to do those things. And so, yeah, these are some of the things that I did pretty early on as I looked at stuff I wanted to do. And I really got excited about testing myself. Like, this is really out of my lane, not in my box at all. Can I do this? Spend some time doing some feasibility checks and researching it, and then coming back and saying, let's see it. I think we can do it. And I get excited about that. So, yeah.
Yeah, and to everyone listening at home, like he said, the vacation planner, he, except recently, been dropping the ball a little bit, but for most of my life, it was like he knew where to eat. He knew he had a list. He had a little clipboard with like the list of the restaurants in the area, wherever we're going to be. If someone said that they were hungry, he'd be like, okay, well, let's see, what time is it? It's 3:30. All right, we're next to this building. Okay, here's all these restaurants that are right here, and these are the ones that are the best ones. Like,
Yeah.
it was vacations were there were, we
Scripted.
yeah, they were scripted, but not in a bad way. It was just like, sometimes you go on vacations and you don't know, and this is the worst feeling. You spend all this money and time to get somewhere, and it's like you don't even know what there is to do. Or you come home and you're like, man, I really wish I knew that was there, or I wish we had known about this restaurant or this activity. And we never really had to worry about that with you. When I went on vacations away from the family, just in my own family, or luckily my wife's a huge planner when it comes to that too. But even prior
She
to
is.
being married, any of the vacations we went on, it was like, I was really just like, let's show up and see how it goes. And then later on, I was like, dang, we missed a couple things. Crap. I didn't
Yeah.
plan it out as much as you did. So anyway, yeah. So I mean, everything you've done in planning that, very goal oriented with finances, right? Or at least budget oriented, which I probably can kind
Yeah.
of go hand in hand with project management, right? As far as setting up how you would
Sure.
manage a budget. Um, were you always that way with money as well, or?
Yeah, I was weird about money all my life, really. I was the type of kid that would have a certain amount of money in my pocket and I'd only spend half. I remember one time when I was in high school, I had $100 bill in my pocket, and my friends, we were going to do something, and they said, "Do you have any money?" I said, "Well, I don't have quite enough." And they're like, "What are you talking about? You have $100 bill?" I says, "I don't touch that." That's, I didn't do that. And anytime I've spent money on things as a younger person too, I would always never spend more than half of what I had. And so the other half didn't exist to me. And so that was a system that I learned early for me. Once again, it's all about systems for me that I figured out pretty early. Don't put yourself in a situation where you don't have what you need. So this is what I did for myself. Everybody will come up with their own thing if you think about it. But there's nothing worse than being in a situation where you're not prepared or you don't have the money you thought, or maybe you're like, wow, I really, really wanted this. I shouldn't have spent it on that. And then you really can't purchase whatever it is. So, yeah, ever since I was young, I was always looking at money that way. And then let's be honest, 5 kids, and we started with the kids pretty young. Your mom and I would, we started young and we right away, hey, we needed a house. And then the family was growing quick. And so we felt like we were also a little bit behind, just financially. And so I was all about making sure we maximized everything we had. So whether it was, purchasing clothes, food, budgeting, going on vacations, especially, I wanted to maximize our experience. These were all things that I had to think about because I had to make more than what it was. Otherwise, it would feel like we didn't accomplish certain things. And so, yeah, I think with money, I've always done that. And now I've gotten older and stuff, there's more flexibility now because all the kids have moved, grown up and moved out. So of course I've gotten a pay raise every
For
time
now.
one moves out. Yeah,
For now. Some of us keep
right.
coming back and forth.
True. And hopefully the grandkids don't come back down the road. But anyway,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. So, yeah, always have been very structured with that. In fact, with my wife and I, she's great at a lot of things, but one of the things that she's just not excited about is budgeting. And so she would not really talk about it too much. And so I was always trying to do it in a way that she could see what the plan was. Once again, just like a project, when you're trying to work around budgets and finances, whether it's at home, a project, a business, you need to really make sure you figure out where you're going, what you're trying to do, and then talk with your stakeholders. In this case, my stakeholder was my wife, and we would talk about, what the goal was for the upcoming year and what we were doing. In fact, right, Anthony, it's not uncommon when we do a family vacation where we all come. That's planned out 2 years in advance, and people think that's funny, but
Which,
it's
yeah,
true.
it's crazy talk in other conversations and even family on my wife's side and stuff. It's like, hey, do you want to go on this trip next month? And we're like, well, hang on. No, next month we can start planning for it for 2027. And
Yeah,
they're like, what are you
yeah.
talking about? Um, yeah, that is something that is, I think, a great thing to do, but some people do find
Yeah.
it unusual. So let me ask
Well,
you
and
this.
even like something, let me just say this,
Yeah, go
even
ahead.
something like at work over the years, I'm in a situation now where I get personal leave and things pretty easily. But when I was younger, when you're competing for that kind of thing where multiple people might want to take off at the same time at work, I've always been that person that at the beginning of the year or a year ahead of time, I'm putting all my personal leave in on the calendar for the whole year coming up. So I always got everything I always wanted because people just don't think ahead. And I realized that pretty early. So anyway, I cut you off. Sorry.
No, that's okay. So how do you here's the question with that is how do you get other people to work with you in those instances? For example, like putting vacation ahead of time, right? If I looked at my calendar and identified the days I wanted off, okay, I can do that. But my lovely wife, on the other hand, is more sporadic. She is a big planner, but she's also more
Yeah.
sporadic in the fact that she has a desire to travel or a desire to do things. Like for me, I can look at the calendar and be like, I'll travel twice this year and I won't ever think about it again. But her, it's like she goes a period of time without doing something fun. She's like, let's do this thing next month. Whatever. So
Yeah.
how do you work with someone, you know, in that situation? So for instance, with you and mom, how did you was she totally on board with that kind of stuff? Or um how did you have those conversations of like, okay, honey, it's January 1st. We need to identify the days that I'm going to take off. Or, did you
Yeah.
have to kind of pull teeth or was she fully on board with that as well?
Good question. And here's the answer. No, she wasn't on board at first. She is also more spontaneous. um, but then realizes that we spent too much or we paid more for a flight than we should or whatever. And so I've just been able to, and not in a nagging way, but help her understand that, look, we could have spent less here by doing this differently. And so over the years, for me, in terms of vacationing and taking time off, I will get with her ahead of time and say, and pull out a whole calendar for the year. And I know this sounds crazy for a lot of people out there. You have to find your own path on this. But for me, I would pull that out and say, look, we know we're doing this, this, and this throughout the year. This is how much personal leave or time away from work we're going to take. And here's what the flights typically cost or whatever. And then I say, what else would we like to do? And then we start talking about that. And then we start looking for the holes in the calendar. And so it's become more uh, casual. In the beginning, it was more scientific. Like I really had to think how to present this in a way that was beneficial to her and me, and she could see the value. But she's seen the value, and it's easier now to do that. And so it's just a little preemptive work on my part to just say, hey, we're going to get together and talk about this next week. Are you all right with that? Let's do it on Sunday or whatever. And then I come prepared with enough information to have the conversation, and also to propose the things that I think would make sense for us to do or what I think would be fun. And then she can say, I don't want to do that. Or, yeah, that sounds great. How much is it? And then we get into that conversation. But it's become more natural over the years. I do know that it's tough sometimes for people in the beginning, um, but you have to kind of establish that process, and the other person's got to trust it. They know that your goal and what you're trying to achieve is really in everybody's best interest, and that you've thought it through, and they trust that. And once that starts to happen, it becomes easier. That conversation becomes easier. So, but it was foreign, for my wife to have me pull out something for a year ahead, and she'd be like, "Why are we looking at this now? Why is it so early?" Blah blah blah. And that's how it was in the beginning for us. But it took a little bit of time for me to kind of help her see it a little bit differently. But she's on board now, and she sees
Yeah.
the benefit because financially and time wise, we're able to do all the things we really want to do, and it doesn't really hit us in a negative way. So
Yeah, and that's a great point. Is just finding a process that works for you. Because like even for me, like sometimes I'll be like, okay, this Sunday we're going to talk about this, and then Sunday comes, I know we're supposed to talk about it. I'm tired. I'm watching movies with the kids. Next thing I know, it's like 8 o'clock at night, and I'm like, we'll talk about this later. And
yeah,
it's that's got to find that process to just even sit down and talk about things. Let me ask you about the budgeting stuff. So, at what point do you, in your opinion, when you mentioned that you felt like you couldn't catch up or you were always behind, at what point do you stop cutting and start trying to increase what you have? Or was it always, I'm just going to increase what I have? Because I feel like a lot of people cut, 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 cut. And then it's like you're cutting out,
yeah,
it's life. You got to enjoy life a little bit. So maybe start working on trying to get more instead of cutting. I think there's probably a good balance there.
yeah. Well, I mean, like always, you have to have a good feel for what's coming in, so that you know what can strategically be spent, right? Just one example is the family early on. We probably shouldn't have done this by some people's view. We went and got a membership to a timeshare. And it was a bunch of money in the beginning, but I knew that we would have it for a really long time. And I decided with with my wife that we wanted to create memories for the family. That was a priority for us. Um, a lot of people do it in a lot of different ways. For us, it was going to be these vacations to various locations so that the kids could always remember something different and be exposed to something different. We agreed to that early, and we decided to spend the money on a timeshare, which now, 27 years later, or whatever it is, we still use, and it's been great. And so that was spending money we probably didn't have at the time, but we found a way to do that with a payment, and we made sure it worked for us. But yeah, there is a time where you decide strategically here and there, we have to enjoy some of the things that are going on in life. If you're always penny pinching and you're always in a situation where you or not allowing yourself to have more, it is hard. And some people can't, right? Some people can't. So I don't want to say you should jump on and do something on a credit card just because you need to get some satisfaction. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying more or less the controlling and shaving of expenses in other areas opens up an opportunity for you to build up for something else. But it has to be strategic if the money's tight, right? Like if you're in a situation where you are living well under your income each month, this becomes easier. But
Mhm.
a lot of young people or people that have big families are in a situation where you have to decide, okay, is both the husband and wife going to work full time? Is that what you want to do? Or are we going to be smart about how we do it off of one income or one and a half incomes? It takes conversation. It takes a joint vision and goal between you and your wife or significant other if you're going to decide how you want to move forward with things. So that's what I would say there. I don't know if I've answered your question, but
Oh, yeah,
that
it's
might
good.
lead us down the yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, good advice, wise advice. Um, let's jump back into goal setting. So you mentioned that you have a process, and one of the things that comes with goal setting and uh, project management, stuff like that, that I think super effective is, and that impresses me about you is like a lot of people just want to jump in and get it done. And I think there's a time and a place for that. But as we've had conversations throughout the years, you're also someone that acknowledges that certain parts of the process might be a little slower, meticulous, and you're okay putting that in. Like you might have a 5-year plan and say, okay, this first year, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to get very slow traction in whatever this goal is, but here's the strategic purpose for this thing that I'm doing. And that will set me up now for the second year, right? And then now I'll maximize my
Right.
growth or whatever. And so that's something that I think most people neglect when they're looking um, at goal setting. In fact, today I was watching a video and someone even said, let's see, there's a quote here. They said, slow is smooth and smooth is fast. And so he basically was saying
Mm.
sometimes it's okay to slow down and just go at a normal pace. You don't have to go freaky fast all the time in certain goals. It's okay to go slower, but pay more attention to them. And that will be
Yeah.
more beneficial. It'll give you more quality in the long run. Anyway, so that being said, what's your process? Like you mentioned the restaurant. You owned a restaurant for a while. Very strange, out of not strange, but just definitely something different than what you were
Yeah.
doing. Um,
Mhm.
right, a lot of learning to do there.
Yes.
What was
Yes.
the process when you were like, I want to own a restaurant? Where did you start, and how did you kind of brainstorm the plan? And how can people apply that process or something similar to whatever their goal is?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I would say that not everybody has to do this, but for me, it was mulling around in my mind for years before I even started doing anything about it. At one point in life, I decided I think I want to do this. Like, win or fail, I want to do it because it's a test and I just want to see that restaurant as a reality and me walking into it. And it was just a goal for myself, right? So early on, I needed to make sure first that there was an engine that could fuel the project. And in this case, I just needed to make sure finances were coming in a way that would take care of everything that we needed and had to have. So then I could put time and effort and investment into something else. So I think that's always important. I think that sometimes people think that they should jump into a new project or some new thing that they want to do, both legs in, and go from cutting one income to just trying to make this work. And guess what? It has worked for people. And guess what? There's some really wealthy people that do that. And so I'm not trying to tell you things don't work. You have to be thoughtful, prayerful, whatever it is for you to be in a position where you really feel comfortable about the path you take. Now, for me, in terms of the restaurant, I started thinking about okay, if I were to make this happen, let me see what this would even look like. So I started doing research and started trying to figure out what the cost was, where I would source supplies, what I wanted the decor to look like, or the actual restaurant inside would look like, what sort of prep and training and menu I'd want to have. There was a lot of thought like that going on in a very casual way, where it was just me putting stuff on a notebook for probably a year. Just when I had some free time, I would do that.
Wow.
But it's interesting when you do that, you see things because your mind's open and waiting for stuff. So I would run into people who had either opened up a restaurant or had sold certain types of equipment, or even people who had brought in products from somewhere else. And I started trying to learn like what that process looked like. So as you're playing in your mind and saying, let me capture thoughts and ideas and envision what's going to happen, you also start to see things that you normally wouldn't see just by going through life. And so that was the first probably year, really. Then I decided, probably the very end of that first year, I'm like, okay, it's time to better understand, from not just common sense, but from business minded people, what's the best way to do some research about locations, about financing, about just everything around opening a restaurant. So a lot of times, like here in Utah, there's a community college program for new businesses or entrepreneurial type things. And it really is great because it doesn't cost you anything. You can go there, they'll set up an appointment with you, and they'll even sit with you and start going through different things. And they'll even help you walk through ideas about, how to plan and move forward with different things. So I took advantage of that, and it was great. It helped carve some of my work down, shave it down so that I didn't have to guess on some things. But that's where I was at that point. So I started scheduling that stuff, and I started saying, okay, let me get some information from other people. And then I start really looking at other restaurants and what was going on, other restaurants that were like what I wanted to do all over the country, doing some research, talking to some people, in some cases calling people and just asking them things. Um, and that was kind of like the feasibility and the idea period, where I was generating what I thought I might want to do and what it might look like. And then that's when I started saying, okay, now a plan needs to be put in place. And I started really thinking about, okay, how much time is it going to take me to tackle this kind of information and do this kind of research? And I started kind of plotting over the next, I don't know, 9 months, how I wanted to approach the information. And so, yeah, I had a whole plan in writing for myself on the computer, actually. And I also started working on a business plan and doing all these different things over that time period. I even spent some time, and you might remember this, where I went out of state to try and meet with some people to source different things, like specific types of foods that were very unique or different. Um, and some of the food I was going to serve was from outside of the Utah area that were kind of niche type foods from another part of the country. And so I spent some time getting information, talking with people there, and that was the next step there, to develop a plan, a business plan, and then to pace and milestone activities over that next period of time. I'll stop in case you have any questions.
Yeah, I guess my main question is like, how do you make the determine to just go and pull the trigger? Because I think so many people plan themselves to death, plan themselves out of business, right? I forget there's a specific term, but like some people just keep planning and they never actually do the thing. And so I agree with what you said earlier too, where it's like, it's not wise to jump both feet in most of the time. I think those people that are very wealthy are the exception. I think there are far more people that have failed. But at the same time, like most of the business ideas I've had throughout life, I would just plan and think and think and think and end up just talking myself out of it. And then the most recent business that's actually producing some income, I was like, let's just do this. I can't think about it. I just got to do it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's been really stressful, but still at the same time, like it's the one that's gotten the furthest and generated the most for us. And so for you, how do you balance planning with, okay, now it's time to pull the trigger and actually do this bad boy?
Yeah. Before I go there, though, there are examples. Like, think of, I think it was Jamba Juice. College students
Oh yeah. Yep.
did something which probably isn't advisable, which is take all their credit card debt and
Yeah.
together they started a business with like $60,000 of money like that. But in a few years, they were millionaires and they sold it for quite a bit of money. So once again, sometimes the passion, the desire, foresight, and just the sheer grit will carry people places. So I want to be careful about that. I'm not a super wealthy guy. And so I don't want to say that there's only one way to do it. We're just sharing one process here.
Sure.
But
Yeah.
yeah,
And you never know how people are going to react. Like you said, someone might jump in and they will never give up, and someone might jump in and hit a few speed bumps and be like, it's not worth it, and they've done detrimental damage, or not detrimental. I mean, there's very little that you can't come back from, but I think maybe they've done more damage that's harder for them to get out of that situation or something by just leaving whatever that former income was that was paying the bills or whatever.
yeah,
Because I even very wealthy people that I follow that jumped in with both feet and became very successful. They'll even advise most of the time, like, you got to have like 6 months to a year of savings, like do it the smart way. What we did was not the smart way, just like the
right.
Jamba Juice people, right? Like, we did this, but we wouldn't do it. We got lucky. We wouldn't do it if it was you. But anyway.
Well, and then even before I get to the point here, even even there are examples of somebody like Elon Musk who, even by very wealthy people's standards, they look at what he did at certain points in his development of some of these companies, and they probably would have folded and just closed shop because it was too risky and very much at the edge. But guess what? His desire and vision has carried him. So you never know, right? Somebody makes history in every way. It's just probably these are just all thoughts that people should put into their toolbox to pull out and
Mhm.
use and just be very wise about how you go through things. Now, you were asking about how do I make or how did I make the decision to pull the trigger on this and one or two of the other businesses that I had where I did pull the trigger. Well, for me, it was I'm a person of probability. And so not everybody thinks this way, but I look at almost everything I do in probabilities. I say, what's the likelihood that this would happen? I use this the way I drive, where I how I travel, where I drive at certain times of the day. Here's a silly thing that I do. I probably shouldn't give this away, but a lot of things that I do, like when I go to a restaurant, I go at 11:30 or 11 o'clock, and that's when I eat lunch. Because guess what? While I'm sitting there and eating, the mass of people come rolling in and get in line.
Mhm.
And I passed, and I do that all the time. And it happens all the time that way. Anyway, my point just being that what's the probability that this is going to happen or work? Now, the restaurant, lots of work, lots of effort. So now I'm 2 years into this. Would still the opportunity to back out if I needed to, but it was getting close. Like it was now sign the paper on leases and actually putting the money out for equipment. And actually, I had somebody come in and help us design some stuff in the restaurant. These were things that once you put the money out, it's done. And so for me, it was a thorough, as much as I could, period of just sitting there and looking at everything and just really dissecting it. So I probably took 2, 3 weeks to just sit there and mull over all that I had prepared and everything that was in front of me. And I sat there and I said, okay, it's risky. Most restaurants don't make it past the first year, but I think I'm going to do it. So I got with my wife and we talked about it. And it was very important for me to feel that she also could, get in agreement with my rationale. And she did. And so we went ahead and we did it. Now, we also knew, and different people handle things differently, we also knew this wouldn't break us. Like, if this restaurant went under, we would lose a whole lot of money. But we also knew it wouldn't break us because we could do it. And so that was a big piece too. If I was putting everything I owned on the block, I would have really went through and scrutinized even deeper than I did. But I did do a pretty thorough look to feel good about what we did. And then at that point, a big review. And then if you're doing it with other stakeholders, that's great. For me, it was my wife. That discussion, and where we both looked at each other and said, okay, we're good to go. Then that's when we started signing things, paying for things, and it was a go at that point. It was going to be live, and so we knew that in 6-7 months everything would be built out, and we would be ready to have a opening day. So
And then the real fun begins.
yeah, exactly. There's a whole lot that came with that too, which we don't need to get into at the moment. But there was definitely, once we were go live and launch, there were, you're right, a whole set of other obstacles and variables that took a lot of more on the spot or timely learning, which is a whole different way. So my thought about that, in what people do in a lot of projects out there, is they try to have a risk log in professional project management. And what they try to do is they try to anticipate failures. And when there's a failure, they try to develop contingency plans, backup plans, things like that, that will allow you to still keep moving forward with an adjusted path. And so that's a project management task or process, and it should be used for things like this as well. And we did do that. So,
Well, I think that's important for people to know too, like kind of what we're just talking about as far as planning so much that you never actually pull the trigger. You're never going to know everything. Do your best to anticipate other things, but I think spend the time analyzing the most important parts of whatever it is that you're pursuing, with the understanding of there's going to be stuff that's going to happen that I don't know. But how do I prepare myself in this case with the restaurant? How do I have extra funds available for maybe something that pops up that I don't anticipate or whatever, right? Is trying to have those backup systems in place to cushion whatever it is that you're going to learn,
yeah.
especially if it's an industry you don't know.
Yeah, and especially an industry like the restaurant industry, where the profit margin is very tight and very small, and you're dealing with product that will, there's a lot of loss in food as well. So you have to be very smart about that as well. And yeah, that makes it hard. Now, I'll also say this, not that we're going there yet, but it's also smart to have an exit plan for yourself. So today I don't own that restaurant because I had an exit plan, because I gave myself a period of time over 5 to 8 years where I was going to make a decision if I wanted to keep doing this or not. And so when we got to about the 5 year mark, I decided I did it. The fun wasn't in it so much for anymore. And I just decided to transition out of it. So that's always smart to do as well. Think about, you don't want to just marry a bad situation, right? So like, if you don't love what you're doing, or if you've received you know the benefit from it that you wanted, you know it's okay to step out or move in a different direction. And people need to know that you should not be locked into it, if you think through exit planning. So
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting you say that too, because even in my business endeavors, I always start where it's like the business is my baby and I can't even imagine getting rid of it. Right now with this Italian ice business, I was like, when it started, I was like, I'll never sell it, And then after a few years, I'm like, I'd sell it. Someone asked me
right.
if someone was like, you want some money up for this? I'd be like, yep, how much? Not to say that I don't like it, but it's like, it's just interesting now. I didn't have that at the beginning, but it's interesting of like, okay, when there comes a time where maybe it's like you said, it's satisfied whatever thing it was supposed to. whatever need it was supposed to. How do you get out of it or whatever? And I didn't think about that at the beginning, but some of those thoughts come up now and then. Um, Not to say that I'm going to sell it, but it's just a funny thought that recently has been coming to my mind is if I wanted to get out of it, how would I get out of it? Kind of a thing.
Right. Right.
So
Yeah. And I think there's always the thought of, what level of expansion, what's the next chapter or page for your business? Is it time to push forward or reel back? Because there are times where you can actually do yourself more damage by quick growth. And then all of a sudden it can collapse your business as well. So, yeah, I mean, you have to be kind of smart about, you know, what the future looks like too and how you're going to react to different things that might happen. So,
yeah, and you got to keep your thumb on the pulse. That's what's great about a lot of what we're talking about is like constantly measuring. You said at the very beginning of the conversation is measuring the steps because a lot of people they're not measuring and they're just not, but they're not getting the results they want, and they'll just double down and they'll go
right.
harder. And again, some people that I follow are like, you got to know when it's not working, or like you said, when it's done its job, when it's done the thing that most benefited from or whatever, move on, kind of a thing.
Yeah.
And how are you supposed to know that if you're not measuring different steps along the way?
Yeah. Well, and, I'll share something real quick that's interesting about this is that we're talking a little bit about project planning and thinking. And I've realized over the years, and it took me about 50 years before I did that I like more than anything the creation and generation of something new. You know, one I had a career in the biomedical field for about 20 years, and it was interesting because I was one of the people that helped set it up in my current location from from scratch. And I ran this and set up things, and I had a department that I was running. And after about 6 or 7 years, I was looking to do something different. So I jumped into a completely new department to run that. And people were like, "What are you doing? You're like this, your department's humming. It's perfect. Like you're done. You like you can sit back." And I'm like, "I'm bored." And so I wanted to move through and do that. And I did that 2 or 3 times there as well. And so for me, I also found that for the restaurant, the building and generating of it was way more exhilarating and exciting to me than actually owning it. Because once I owned it, it was kind of boring for me, to be honest with you. So,
All you had to do is go in there and eat some food every once in a while.
right.
No, a little bit
That's
more than
right.
that, but
Yeah.
interesting. You are in a project management role
Yeah.
and you've basically taken your goal setting process, but now it applies to many things at once and many people, right? So let's
Yeah.
talk to me a little bit about that. How do you go from mastering goal setting and creating processes for yourself alone is a challenge for most people, just sticking to the plan. Now, how do you then take that and roll it into many projects with many people that are probably not like you as far as
Yeah.
like organizational wise? How do you take that step?
Yeah. Well, so I do function now professionally as a project manager. And so I did that. I figured I wanted to go back and get back into traditional work for a bit since I owned businesses and took some time off after the biomedical work. And I thought, hey, I need to make sure I'm ready for retirement. So I went back into the regular work atmosphere, this time as a project manager. And it was interesting because of my experience and all the things I've done before that, I was able to get the job, but I had no really professional training as a project manager. Now, there is pretty good training to be a project manager, and there's a whole systematic approach for how you process and work a project. And the company, well, it's called the PMP process, and there's certifications and stuff that people can take for that professionally. But for me, I realized that some of the processes that take place in a project really were what I was doing in life anyway, but just didn't know to call it that. So I'll run through just a couple things that happen, like
Mhm,
in the structure of project management.
mhm.
These are high level steps, and it's way more complex than just what I'm going to go over here. But it gives you an idea of the framework of what happens in a project. So initially with a project, there's an initiation stage where basically you have an idea and an objective of something you need to accomplish for yourself or for the company. And there is getting those details figured out. And then there's moving ahead and getting all kinds of information you can about what it's going to do, where it's going to work, how it's going to impact people, all the details you can get. The biggest part of a project is the planning phase. So you spend most time there if you want to be most successful. And so that's what we do. There's the initiation phase, and then you start doing some feasibility work, some understanding what's going to happen. You start bringing in stakeholders to add, their information and their expertise to the pieces of the project that need to happen. And then, there's of course costing and timelines and all that kind of stuff. So if you have an understanding of these steps, you can do a project and then do several projects, in parallel, um, working with different people and doing different processes. So right now, for me, I'm probably working anywhere from 10 to 15 projects a year, which is a lot, but it keeps me busy and I'm dealing with a lot of different things at once. So going back though, initiation phase, and then we go into a planning phase. So the planning phase, like I said, is probably the biggest part. And what you're trying to do is outline what you're getting, what you're going to do, tasks, timelines, resources, budgets, and then everything that's involved in seeing what we really need to see to get to the end point of the project. You want to be as clear as you can about everything that's coming and what you have to handle and deal with. Now, there's going to be tricks and there's going to be unknowns all along the process. And that's understood too. And as a project manager, a lot of times you recognize that and you put in a play to account for those things too. A lot of contingency planning. So there's that. But one of the things that in project management we look at, we say, have SMART goals, which are like specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound goals for how you think about where the project needs to go. And then you also want to assign out or determine who you're going to assign out roles to. Look, in the restaurant situation, I was the one doing most of the work, but I also did involve my wife for certain things that she was good at that I thought could help me. And I also did get a little consult from a few people as well. And so there were tasks and action items for different people to get that done. And that's what happens in a project as well. And so you'll do that um, in one or many projects, depending on what you're doing. So, in a nutshell, though, with the planning, with the things that I just mentioned, you want to take a large goal and really break it into smaller, measurable milestones. That's one of the most important things you can do. It doesn't matter if it's getting in shape, changing your diet, building a house, starting a business, doing a vacation, whatever it is, break it up into short milestones so that you can track and adjust when stuff is off all the way through the process. If you just shoot straight through, it's that line that starts to veer and then you're going to be somewhere else if you're not careful. So you want to be able to have, you know, points along a project where you can actually assess and determine, am I on track? Am I off track? Is cost where it needs to be? Is the timeline too long? Whatever it is. Because you also have to be in a place where you say, this is going to be more than it's worth, cost wise or whatever. An example might be you have a business idea and you want to do it. And you decide, or even a vacation, and you decide we want to do this. But through your work, planning, and scheduling, and then looking at all the pieces, you realize, whoa, this is going to take more money than we had saved up. Well, now's the time to back out, readjust, or do a different project or vacation or whatever it is. So, once again, I think one of the most important things with planning is the breaking things down into small steps so that you can react and adjust. Does that make sense? Any question about that so far?
No, that makes sense. And what I love about this and why I think it applies to people listening is again, you're going to have to manage yourself. If it's your goal, whatever it is, like you're in charge of it. If you fail, it's your fault. It's my fault if I fail a goal. There's no putting that off. I have to be the one that pushes it forward. So I have to manage myself, but then at the same time, as I mentioned, it's like a lot of these goals that people have involve other people, whether you're reaching out to someone that, is really not getting a benefit from it, but you're trying to learn from them, or someone who kind of is involved, but, maybe they have different goals or different focuses than you do. Like I was thinking earlier today, I was watching something and, there was like, you should do what you love and blah, 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 blah. Right. Okay. I agree with that. But I'm sitting here going, okay, if I wanted to make a movie, I got to get a lot of people involved in that. I can't just go do that tomorrow. Right. That would be a big process. And so how would I would have to rope other people into doing something. Right.
Yeah.
Anyway, so that's kind of where that question came from, is like a lot of things that we're going after will involve other people. And so how do you balance and kind of juggle it all? Talk to me about day to day. Like when you talk about these little steps with project management or goal management, are you spending like, would you have a whole day set apart for research, or not even a whole day, but let's say I had a few hours today after work, I come home, I have a few hours to work on this. Is the whole time being set up with just research, or do you segment it like, okay, for an hour I'm going to research, for an hour I'm going to do follow-up calls, for an hour I'm going to do this? Because again, it's your job to push the project forward. So how do you manage like a day to day on that um, kind of scenario, if that
Yeah.
makes sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, once again, it kind of depends on what the project is you're working on. I'm going to use a couple of examples here in two different ways. So let's talk about something like changing your diet and exercising. Okay. If you know that you are somebody who struggles with sweets, or that, you're tired from when you get home and you don't feel like making dinner after work, so you go out to eat a lot, these are things you need to think of ahead of time so that you have developed your action plan to give yourself the chance for success. So, a lot of people think they can do it on sheer will and desire, and that goes and works for a while. But really, you need to have a plan for how you're going to help yourself in the difficult moments by thinking of things ahead of time. So that's important, and that would include, if we're talking about dieting and exercise, it would be, what am I going to do this week? Do I need to be the type of person that actually food preps and puts it on a piece of paper, like what I'm going to eat today? You might be, or you may not have these problems. I mean, you're going to have to know yourself enough to see at what level and how granular you have to go to get into the details so that you give yourself a chance for success. That's the key. Give yourself a chance for success by being honest with yourself about where you're weak and where you're going to trip and fall. If you can be honest about that, you can start to prepare and build against your own failure possibilities. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, that makes sense. No, that's great.
So let me talk a little bit about something like this. So um, your listeners may not know, I decided to do a podcast this year because I wanted to. I had some free time and I just wanted to do it. This is also something that is completely out of my lane, not something that I've ever had any experience with or even probably have skill in it. But I wanted to do it because I just felt like I wanted to look and talk about things that were strange and unexpected. So, what did I do? And you and I talked about this, Anthony, as I was thinking about this. I was thinking about it and talking about it, I think probably in September of last year.
Yeah, we were
And
driving to California and you were like, "So, what do you know about podcasting?" I was
yeah,
like, "Podcasting? Like listening to it or making it?" And you're like, like if I wanted to make one."
yeah, exactly. And you know that I was preparing, thinking, coming up with ideas for episodes and where I wanted this whole podcast thing to go, like what was going to be my thing, right? For months, little by little on the side after work and in between other things I was doing. So in the beginning, it was all about just research and developing. Okay. So then I got into January and we talked, and most everything looked like I was good to start. I don't know if you remember, but it was like, we, you could probably start anytime, is what it was. And I said, no, 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 I don't want to start till March or April because I want to have a bunch of episodes planned, scheduled, and I want to make sure that, you know, I have some consistency. So, yeah, I don't even think I started till probably March or April. Um, but I've been very good and consistent, have lots of variety and good information ever since that point. But I attribute that to the planning early and the fact that I had free time, right? Like I had evenings that I could do stuff.
Hmm.
Be much more difficult if I was really busy in the evenings. But so to kind of answer your question, it was research heavy early, and then it became the logistics and the process, really researching and figuring out how to put that together. And then after that point, it is a combination of content development, editing, scheduling, soliciting, research, whatever. And so now at this point, and probably from the summertime on, it was breaking down the window of time that I put aside for the podcast to figure out I will do this much for this much time. I will do this, this, this. And so I did break it out. So it kind of answered your question. It was all one thing early, and then another thing early, and then it started getting broken down and striated as I realized, okay, now I'm running and now I have 5 or 6 things I need to address on a pretty regular basis. So I will need to allot time for each of these so that I'm hitting those. And I'm always reassessing that. In fact, it's pretty common for me each month to look at the current and the next month about what I'm going to do, how I'm going to attack information and content creation, and who I'm going to interview, what research I'm going to do. And I'm always kind of re-looking at that and redeveloping each month. And I think that's what happens in a lot of projects too. Um, there's a lot of feedback that you need in project work, whether it's for personal stuff or at work or whatever, because you're looking for feedback for adjustments that need to be made during your execution work. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. And just to kind of, as an example of his management capability, I'm like only ever 2 weeks ahead on my podcasting right now. I have like maybe 1 or 2 weeks planned, and he has like 20.
Yeah.
So you could sit back, not make another podcast for several months, and still have something coming out every week, if not twice a week.
Yeah.
So, the preparation pays off. I think more prep up front, being a little more patient, taking a little more time, uh, ultimately provides a number of different benefits um, in the long run. Where you don't have to be worried about, squeezing some episodes out. And luckily, both your episodes and my episodes, it's not like time sensitive stuff.
Yeah.
Um, but you know, planning.
Well, and let me add one more thing once again about knowing yourself. One thing I know about myself when we're talking about podcasting is if I leave it to where I need to produce something for this week or next week, that stress I don't like, and I'm more likely to drop the ball. And I know that about myself. And so what do? I need to prepare against that. Anyway, going back to my
That's
point
great.
earlier, which is know your potential pitfalls and prepare against those for success. So,
Yeah, that's great. Okay, well, I'll ask you about your podcast here in just a second. Our time's winding down here, but I wanted to ask you, like, obviously we've covered a lot of great things. If we, if you could give like one piece of advice in regards to goal setting and managing personal projects, work projects, whatever, what do you think that would be? Would you have one piece of advice, or maybe you have, like you were saying earlier, like I would follow these steps, like research this, that, this, you know, what would you tell people at home to raise the bar in their pursuits, their goal setting and they're working through some of those. Um,
yeah. Yeah. So obviously, people will be more concerned or strict about the budgeting and stuff like that, depending on what they're doing and how much they have set aside. So, for instance, if you're doing a home remodel and you have $40,000 set aside to do it, and it probably will cost you 20 to 30, you have flexibility. You don't have to really focus in as much
Mhm.
because you're not going to be stressed about falling or going over budget. So that could be the case for some people. But I will say this as a general rule of thumb: the better you prepare, the better you research, the better you map it out, the more successful you'll be, the happier you'll be with your results. And so no matter what you do, the more thought you put into it up front, I think there's no way to you're always going to be paid back tenfold for that. And it really doesn't matter what you're doing. So that's a nutshell thing that I would say is probably one of the most important things you can do, which is just um, anticipate, research, prepare, and try to see what you're going to do. And we did talk about milestones as well. I think that's pretty important. Um, if you're doing, let's say, a remodel in your home and you're in August and you want it set up and nice for Christmas, well, you need to be making sure that there are milestones with the people you have doing the work, because that stuff can just slide. And then you'll be sitting in a situation where everybody's there for Christmas with no fireplace and and drywall up and stuff. And you want to make
It's
sure that
happened to a
doesn't
lot of
happen.
people.
It does. It does. So you're always going to be better off by really planning it out that way, and even talking. Let's an example where you're working on a project. Let's say in this case, home remodel. It's very important to be clear about those milestones and timeframes with the people you have working for you or contracted to do work for you, so that they're clear and understand what the expectation is for timelines and what if they slide, what it does to impact other things. So
Yeah, I think that's great
common
advice.
sense. It's kind
Yeah,
of common sense. Yeah. But you just got to
well,
think about it.
yeah, I think it's great advice, and I think communicating with others, it holds them accountable, and it's about setting proper expectations. If you're working with other people and they don't know the deadlines or they don't know what the result will be if you don't hit the deadline, it's almost not fair to get mad at them if something happens, in my opinion, um, because they didn't know. So I think communication
Right.
is key. But like we were saying earlier, as far as individual goals, it's up to us to drive those goals. There's something I'm working on, and there's someone involved in it, business related, and I was sending them some emails, didn't hear anything back. Sent them some phone calls, didn't hear anything back, and it got to the point where I was just like calling them every day, and I'd leave them a message every day and be like, "Hey, man, call me
Hmm.
back," blah, blah, blah. And finally got a hold of him, and I was doing it respectfully. I wasn't being annoying or anything, um, but I was being persistent, and I had kind of gotten a schedule that I would call him at a certain time every day or every couple days. And I finally got a hold of him, and he's like, "Hey, sorry, I've been super busy. Um, I didn't mean to drop the ball on this." And I said, "Hey, don't worry about it. It's my job to stay in front of you because this is a project I want to move forward."
Yep.
So my processes are the most important thing to stay on top of other people. And I think that's with anyone's goals is your process
Yes.
has to be more dialed in and you have to be measuring it because other people aren't going to care about your goals as much as you.
That's a great point. And I agree with that 100%. I've always said nobody loves your stuff like you do. So if
Mhm.
you don't give it the time and effort, don't expect other people to do it because they have their other things that they're doing. So, yeah.
Yeah. 100%.
There-
Well, I want you to tell us about your podcast here. But before I say that, is there anything else about goal setting, project management, anything um, that you wanted to share that we didn't get to prior to this conversation? We just briefly said, hey, I think this is a really great topic to cover. We didn't really talk any more details than that. So this has been a great conversation. Was there anything else you wanted to bring up? Just wanted to ask before we start wrapping it up.
No, I don't think so. I mean, there are many more complex and deeper steps for a project, but I think what's applicable in most people's lives is the things we went over. Just,
Mhm.
being thoughtful and having that framework of processes and action steps and evaluation steps and readjusting. I think that will get people far in what they do in life. So, yeah, I think
Sweet.
so.
Cool. Well, you mentioned you have a podcast. So where can people find you? And we'll include these links in the show notes.
Yeah,
And so where can they find you and what's the show about?
absolutely. It's called High Strangeness. And High Strangeness talks about all things strange and unexpected in our reality. So if you want to know more about everything from UFOs to night terrors to people missing to cryptids to just really anything out of the normal, that's the podcast. And we're young. It's just this is the first year and it'll get better. But we've got some great interviewees and topics. We have top-notch authors. In fact, one of the people that are coming up here at the beginning of December is an author, Chris Newby, who produced a book called Bitten. And she's been interviewed before me by RFK Jr. and also Tucker Carlson. I love it. Anyway, yeah, so she met with Tucker Carlson, all this before I even talked to her. So we're talking about, with that episode, the Lyme's disease problem that came out. It was really big in the 80s and stuff, and it's still out there. And there is very clear evidence that there is bioweapons mm, release, actually, something that's happened there where this has gotten out into the public of ticks and all
So it's
over.
not
So
natural.
that's not natural. So you definitely want to catch that. But you're going to see stuff like that on the show. And we'll continue to do that with lots of really cool stuff about really anything um, out there. So you can go to High Strangeness Show, or really it's High Strangeness, how.com. That's the website. And you'll post the link to the YouTube
Hmm.
channel, and also I'm also on Spotify and you know iHeartRadio and all those others as well. So yeah, if you like that kind of thing, dial it in, check it out. And Anthony's on with me sometimes, and other cool people as well. So it'll be fun.
Yeah, it's a great show. It's fun to see all the things out there that you'd never even heard of. Diseases, conditions, experiences that people have had, you know,
Yep.
phenomenon, whatever, just different things. So I'm glad you're doing it. It's exciting and you're getting some great guests on there. So thank you for being here today, Tony. It's been hard not to call you dad.
Yeah.
Thanks for being here. I don't even know if I've ever told you this, but what we've talked about today is one of the things I've looked up to you most for a long time.
Thank you.
Obviously, you're my dad, so you're kind of my hero in many ways.
Oh man,
I
you're
don't
gonna
want
make
you to
me
cry.
blush.
I don't want you to start crying or tearing up. But
Yeah.
anyway, one of the things I've always admired is your goal setting and ability to pursue things. Again, they might not even be these grandiose things. Whether they're big or whether they're small, you follow these processes. Whether it's going out
Yeah.
to dinner at Disneyland, or starting a podcast or coaching a football team or whatever. I've always looked up to your process and ability to be disciplined and following these things. And so that's why I thought it was so important to have you on the show and talk about some of this stuff, not just for the audience, really more for me, so I can figure out how to get my life in a little bit more order. But I'm sure it's applicable to most of the audience as well. So thank you for being here.
Absolutely loved it. And I love what you're doing on your show and the type of content you're putting out. So keep doing that as well, because I'm one of your listeners as well. So love it. Keep it up. And for everybody else out there, I hope this helps you some. And there's a lot for everybody to do. Get a process in place, make it happen. Right.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Pursue something. Life is about pursuing things and accomplishing things, just going through that journey of improving. And so I think it brings a tremendous amount of joy, more joy if you have a little more strategy, like we talked about today. So,
Yeah.
anyway, thank you guys so much for listening today. And thank you to Tony Hernandez and the High Strangeness Show. Check that out in the show notes. And I will talk with you next week.
Thank you for joining in today, because pursuing a balance between family, health, and hustle, it can feel a little wacky sometimes. So we need to learn from each other. And with a simple click to subscribe, we'll invite you back to our next episode. In the meantime, download our free ebook, 6 Secrets for Success, at familyhealthandhustle.com. And remember, we're on this journey together.
Hey, real quick, before you go, I just wanted to jump on here and say thank you so much for listening to today's episode. Really appreciate you being here, and I hope some of the things we talked about help inspire and uplift you in whatever journey you are going through. Now, in order to build this community, I have an ask for you. I don't know what I don't know, and so there are plenty of people out there with great stories, and I need help finding them. So I've added a new link to the website, familyhealthandhustle.com. If you scroll to the very bottom, there is a guest suggestions link. Please, if you have anyone in mind, or you know someone personally that would love to share their story, their journey, how they're pursuing goals, how they're balancing life, whether it's health, whether it's a hustle, whether it's just their day job, it doesn't have to be some crazy business idea, or how they're balancing a family or different obstacles in their life, please have them go to familyhealthandhustle.com, scroll to the bottom, and select guest suggestions. Send me their information. I would love to have them on the show. Thank you so much for supporting the show. I'll see you next time.